Good evening, everyone. Thank you. Last minute adjustments here. I'd like to call to order the January 3rd, 2017 Placerville City Planning Commission meeting. If you would all rise and join me in pledging allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Vice Chair Roby.
Present.
Member Friend.
Happy New Year.
Member List. Here. Member Lowry.
Here.
So on our consent calendar tonight, we have three items. The agenda from tonight, minutes from the November 15th, 2016 meeting, and also item 1.3, temporary mobile home permit for Marshall Medical Center. Is there anything to be pulled from the consent calendar tonight?
Mr. Chairman, I'd request we pull 1.3 for discussion.
So we will pull item 1.3, and that will be added as
2.1.
2.1. Thank you.
Move to adopt consent calendar. Accept as noted.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, nay. Motion carries. This is the point of the meeting tonight where we open the floor to items of interest to the public. These are items.
Point of
Yes.
order. I think we actually go to 2.1, which is the item that got pulled from the agenda. Sorry.
So
not-
you
it's
may
so
hear that. You may hear
unfair.
that phrase several times tonight.
No.
Point of order.
It's so unfair to
So
do your first.
unfair. Yes.
If I could-
Yes. Item 2.1.
I just wanted to inquire about staff. I mean, this is a relatively pro forma sort of request, and I don't have any issue with the request. I noticed in the report and in the letter from Marshall Hospital, it says that that the continued use of the coaches allows for the prioritization of the expansion of medical services needed by the community and further allows Marshall to budget a master plan for the removal. And I guess my question is there in fact any budgeting or master planning for the removal going on? I mean, is there any anticipated sunset? Can Marshall give us any idea about when this will end? Because we do keep approving a continuance of the use.
Staff is not privy to or has knowledge of such a scope, but there is a representative of the hospital here this evening who might be willing to speak on that item, that issue.
That'd be great if at the pleasure of the commission.
Yeah, please address the commission at this time. Thank you. If you could state your name and position, that would be great. Thank you.
My name is Dana Rice. I'm the Director of Construction and Engineering at Marshall Medical Center. So to answer your question, we were hoping that the extension would actually go to the term that the Planning Commission had determined before. So we don't really have a set in concrete time for the removal of the coaches at this time. But as the letter stated, we're moving forward with several construction projects at the hospital at this time, which have a lot of medical services for the community, which is new cath lab, new MRI, new radiology department. So as far as a set in stone time to remove the coaches, we don't really have one at this time. We were really hoping that we could go to the full term of that the Planning Commission had determined in the previous meetings.
And for the record, that would be December 31st, 2022?
Yes.
Okay, so that's another 6 years or so. Okay, so then that's the master plan for removal, essentially.
At this time, yes.
12/31/22. Okay.
At this time, yes.
Thank you.
Do you have any other comment from the board? Do we need a motion?
I move that we accept and file the update by Marshall Medical Center, TMH 01-02.
Second.
Oh, public here, okay.
Is that what we call point of order? Is there anyone else from the public who would like to comment on this agenda item at this time? I see none. No problem. I believe we have a motion. Do we have a second? We do have a second.
All in favor?
All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Item 3, I believe, is now the point of the meeting where we open the floor to items of interest to the public. This is reserved for people to speak on items that are not on the agenda, that are under the purview of the commission. If we deem it so necessary, we may be limited to 3 minutes per speaker. We'll kind of play that by ear and see how long we go. Any public comment on items for the Planning Commission that are not on the agenda tonight? Okay. Written communications?
Staff has provided you for your review.
Andrew, is your mic on, or can we check that? Or oh, there we go. Okay.
Hello, hello.
Seems a little better.
The communication tonight is a memorandum that staff's prepared for you for your consideration tonight. It's regarding item 5.2 on tonight's agenda. Copies have been made available to you all, and copies were made available to the public in the back of the room.
Okay, thank you. Item 5, public hearings, 5.1, 1361 Broadway site plan review. Do we have a report from staff?
Yeah, the site is located at, as you said, 1361 Broadway. It's located within the Broadway Village commercial corridor along the north side of Broadway, approximately 250 feet west of the intersection of Broadway and Schnell School Road. Back in 2003, the Planning Commission conditionally approved Site Plan Review 03-03 and Conditional Use Permit 0301 involving the construction and use of a 4,400 square foot automotive service and car wash facility known as Splasherville Car Wash and Lube. The facility has a stucco exterior painted light brown and has a masonry stone veneer. The site contains areas for self-service and business operation vehicle detailing, as well as areas for vehicle queuing for the lube and car wash business components. The request this evening is made by Solar Hut on behalf of the property owner for a major change to that site plan review back in 2003 for the construction and use of a carport shade structure, and on top of that structure will be photovoltaic solar panel roof panels. The new carport structure would be located and constructed near the southeast corner of the project location, covering an existing 2-stall vehicle vacuum station. Structure height would range from 12 to 17 feet due to its angled design that's necessary to capture the sunlight in the eastern sky. The structure support would be powder coated to match the base color of the existing car wash building and have a masonry stone pedestal base to match that used with that building. The applicant states that the carport request would serve two purposes. It would provide shade for employees during automobile detailing services, and secondly, the roof structure photovoltaic panels would generate clean, renewable energy for the on-site business. The new structure would change the site's appearance and therefore is considered a major change to the approved site plan from back in 2003. Before the city may issue a building permit for the new shade structure, the Planning Commission must approve this major change. Staff finds that the base color and pedestal base material proposed for the shade structure would match that of the car wash and lube building, making it consistent with site plan review criteria regarding the use of quality and durable materials that are in harmony with each other. Also, the solar generation by the request would meet Policy F and Policy F2 of the General Plan's Natural, Cultural, and Scenic Resources section or element, in that the project would use a non-fossil fuel energy source, thus promoting energy and resource conservation. Staff recommends the Commission find the request exempt from an environmental review, in that this is a small structure, such as a carport, would meet the class of uses that are exempt under Section 15303E of the California Environmental Quality Act guidelines. The Commission should be aware that this project was publicly noticed as required per city regulations, and no public comments have been received. Staff recommends the Commission make findings 1 and 2 on page 3 of staff's report that are in support of the approval, then approve the major change request subject to the conditions of approval 1 through 9 on pages 3 and 4 of staff's report. Mr. Vice Chair, that concludes my staff report.
Thank you. Do we have a representative from the applicant in the audience? Would it be appropriate to come to the podium and speak at this time?
Good evening, President of Solar Hut.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for listening to us. Good evening.
This is the property owner, Raphael.
Do we have any questions for either the representative of Solar Hut or the, well, at this time, the representative of Solar Hut from members of the board?
Hey, Luke,
Hello.
can you assure me that this will be vastly superior to a coal-fired steam turbine mounted on the roof?
I hope so.
Okay, I'm sold.
Just a question and a comment. There are no panels on the facility presently. I noticed in the diagrams it showed placement of panels, so this is part of a total panel package, or do you
Correct.
already have panels installed?
No, it would be a total panel package. The actual structure would also accommodate about 70% of the production would be off the car wash structure itself, but from any of the street views, excluding Highway 50 where you're elevated above it, you wouldn't see it because of the parapet walls.
Sure.
But about 70% of the production of the system is on above the car wash.
Great.
And the lube exchange area.
And I don't find solar panels offensive in appearance, and I think they're obviously quite valuable. The only comment I would make, and I think this is for anyone that brings a project like this, with the graphics, the computer graphics that are available now, I think it would be really helpful in, let's see, there's one photo in particular, and it's not up there, but it's the one with, you've got the Wiener Schnitzel, so really it's going right here where the vacuums are. We're looking right at the Wiener Schnitzel, right?
That's correct.
It would have been really helpful to have just had the structure drawn in there. I don't think it's that difficult to do. That would really provide the scale. I would have provided a view looking east, and then probably one off of Broadway, just so you can look and see what it looks like.
There should be a rendition of the Broadway view.
There's a drawing, right?
Correct.
But I mean, in terms of something that
In the
color like this, I think would be helpful. But that's a minor comment from an old commissioner.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the speaker tonight? Thank you for your time.
We appreciate your consideration.
Do we have any questions or comments from the public at this time? Okay. Should we close the public hearing? We'll close the public hearing at this time.
And I had a question for staff, if I might.
Yes.
As I like to get into the weeds from time to time, is the use of the term carport relevant or generic? Because when I think of carports, I think of fixed structures that people are putting next to their driveways or something to park their cars in for shelter, and this just seems different. It seems like a temporary usage. Is it just carport? Just seems like the word to use, or does it have a code relevance that we should know about?
Interesting that this discussion I had with our building official about the use of the term. In this sense, because it is going over parking stalls, it would serve as a port for cars while they're being detailed.
Okay.
I think in my staff report, maybe I've vacillated between the two terms, but it is a shade structure. First and foremost, that's really what their intent is. It just happens to have solar panels on the top as well, so there are two benefits here. I think those could be interchangeable in this particular circumstance, or the circumstance the member may remember when Marshall Hospital came before you several years back, where clearly that was covering a parking lot. So those would have been a carport, for lack of a better term. But it is technically a shade structure. Is there a preference? Should we get these in the future as to how the commission would like these termed?
I just want you to know that I read the report and paid attention to it.
Any other questions for staff? Any discussion at this time?
I think we should move the request if someone likes to make a motion.
Go ahead.
Commissioner Lowry.
I'd like to move that we make the following findings as already elucidated. Sorry about that. In page 3, Roman numeral 2, A, B, Roman numeral 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, down through 9.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Can we take a vote, please?
Member Lowry?
Aye.
Member List?
Aye.
Vice Chair Roby?
Aye.
Member Friend?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. On to item 5.2.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, point of order, I assume.
I need to dismiss myself from this proceedings because of the location of where I live.
All right, thank you. Okay. Item 5.2, Housing Element RH in a Rezone Program 3. Do we have a report from staff?
Yes, I will be presenting that report tonight. The site's located in western Placerville, south of Middletown Road and Panning Way, and north of Placerville Drive and east of Cold Springs Road. The site consists of 2 adjoining vacant parcels that total approximate 7.6 acres. Parcels are owned separately, with the western parcel owned by the Wu Brothers Investment Company and the eastern parcel owned by Salvatore and Mary Spano. Single-family residential uses are located north along Middletown Road and Panning Way within unincorporated El Dorado County. Commercial retail, commercial service, and professional office uses are located to the east, south, and west of the project site. These locations have a commercial land use designation and zoning classification, as does the project site tonight. The existing commercial designation and classification permits a variety of uses, including mixed-use structures containing ground floor commercial and multifamily apartments above the ground floor, hotels, motels, domestic violence shelter, new and used retail sales, used merchandise retail, pawn shops, and antique stores. These are all uses that the commercial designation permits by right. The project location has direct frontage along Middletown Road, Cold Springs Road, and Placerville Drive. Water and sewer service utilities are available and have capacity to serve the site and the project if it's developed. Police services are provided by the city. Fire protection services are provided by El Dorado County Fire District. El Dorado Transit serves the site as well, with 2 transit stops located along Cold Springs Road and Placerville Drive, both within walking distance of the site. The request this evening is city initiated. It is a component of the city's undertaking to rezone land to accommodate the city's unmet housing need for lower income households under Program 3 of the 2013-2021 housing element. This request involves amendments to the general plan land use map and Placerville zoning map, placing the city's general plan and zoning ordinance housing opportunity overlay provisions on the project location. The staff has prepared an initial study, mitigated negative declaration, which was noticed and circulated for the request and is made part of your packet for your review this evening. The result of the housing opportunity overlay, or HO overlay, would allow as a development option on the project location the construction by right of standalone multifamily residential uses. In other words, the site could be developed under the underlying base commercial designation and classification and uses. For instance, those uses I mentioned just a few minutes ago. Or they could pursue down the housing opportunity overlay option to build multifamily housing. The established density range of 20 dwelling units per acre minimum to 24 dwelling units per acre maximum would be established for the site. The overlay would require that a minimum of 50% of all housing be made available to the very low and low income household categories for a minimum of 30 years. The land use classification HO overlay would also allow the developer to select from a list of 3 incentives for their construction of housing. At the maximum permitted density of 24 dwelling units per acre on the site under the HO overlay, the 7.6 acre project site would generate a maximum capacity of 182 units. It is anticipated, however, that realistic unit capacity for a potential housing project would be somewhat less than this due to site slope along Placerville Drive and a portion of Cold Springs Road, as well as required frontage and roadway improvements, other regulatory constraints, or market conditions. The city's general plan land use section and housing element contains several goals and policies that are applicable to the request. They include maintaining an inventory of land to accommodate the city's share of future housing needs, including housing affordable to all income levels, including those at the lower income level, the moderate income level, etc. Also to promote infill development by identifying sites and providing development incentives to provide and promote energy conservation. The requested project and its housing opportunity overlay provisions would be consistent with the land use and housing element goals and policies in that it would promote the development of an infill site surrounded by existing residential and commercial uses. It would help implement the housing element program number 3, the unmet need, high density development, land with the potential to accommodate the city's unmet need for those lower income households. It would require and meet the goal to require affordability commitments. It would allow the developer to select from incentives, as I mentioned, and it would require the use of energy efficiency in its appliances within the the multifamily housing, and encourage the inclusion of housing adapted for use by the disabled and allowing for aging in place. The requested change to the zoning map by adding the HO overlay would be consistent with the purpose of the Housing Opportunity Overlay Zone and help implement Program 3, as I mentioned. Staff did prepare an initial study. Again, it was provided to you and in your staff packet. It's Exhibit A of staff's report. It's important to emphasize tonight that the request does not propose or require actual housing development. Simply put, it would allow for the potential to develop residential housing on the site as an option under or in opposition to or as an option to the commercial land use designation that exists currently on the site. The initial study mitigated negative declaration, which I will now call ISMND for short, moving forward in my report tonight, analyzed potential environmental impacts at the maximum permitted density and capacity of the project site at the 24 dwelling units per acre. Again, that total would be 182 potential units. The environmental resource areas that staff evaluated that could potentially be affected by the development of the site with multiple family housing would include aesthetics, air quality, biological resources, cultural resources, geology and soils, greenhouse gas emissions, hazard and hazardous materials, hydrology, water quality, noise, public services, transportation and traffic, utilities, and service systems. Staff has prepared mitigation measures for those potential impacts that are identified in the ISMND. These mitigations are designed to reduce any potential impacts to a less than significant level. These mitigation measures are included as project conditions of approval applicable to any qualified housing development project under the Housing Opportunity Overlay for this site if this project is approved. So once again, the mitigation measures would remain with the site and move forward and be conditions of approval should a housing development project move forward. Proposed mitigation measures stipulate compliance with municipal code regulations, including zoning classification and the zoning ordinance, grading and drainage regulations, street and street frontage improvement requirements. It also requires and stipulates consistency and compliance with the city's development guide, its design and construction standards manual, as well as the pedestrian circulation plan and the non-motorized transportation plan. It requires compliance with the El Dorado County Air Quality Management District rules and requirements, the rules and requirements of the El Dorado Irrigation District. That district would serve as the water purveyor for the site. In addition, there are site-specific and specific mitigation measures in the event of encountering during construction the unexpected paleontological, cultural resources or human remains. And lastly, temporary construction noise impacts are minimized under the mitigation measure that would limit construction hours as well as days of the week. The public review draft of the ISMND was circulated for a 30-day period, which began on November 30th and ended on December 30th. As of this afternoon, this afternoon, comments received to date were from the United Auburn Indian Community, the El Dorado Irrigation District, and public comments were received from Howard and Judy Madison, William Frayling, Sarah Halverson, Carolyn L. Madison, Ken Pence, Margaret Muff and Julie Muff, Loy and Carol Nesser, and Shannon and Daniel Leslos. Those were provided as Exhibit D of staff's report. An additional comment was received from Jaime Garcia and was included in staff's memo provided to you, to the members this evening. Comments raised can be categorized into those involving the existing and project traffic on Middletown Road and Cold Springs Road, project noise and parking, and the effect of low-income housing on the site that would increase crime and lower property values. Tonight, staff is requesting that the Commission make recommendations to the City that they certify the mitigated negative declaration prepared for the request and direct staff to file a notice of determination. Request and make recommendations to City Council to adopt a resolution amending the general plan land use map for the 2 parcels subject to tonight's request by adding the housing opportunity overlay. Adopt an ordinance amending the zoning map for the city for the 2 parcels by adding the housing opportunity overlay zoning classification. As my eyes water here, I'm concluded my staff report. I'm going to go grab a bit of water.
All right, thank you. Do we have any public comment on the item tonight? If we do, if you could just come up to the podium one at a time. If we do have a number of speakers, we're pretty early in the evening, so we'll try not to limit it. I know this is a fairly popular topic, let's call it that. And if you could, I'm not going to ask you for the name. If you would like to state your name for the record, you may do so. You are not obligated to do so in any way.
Thank you. My name is Margaret Muff, and I am a resident and owner of a parcel on the Panning Way, Middletown Oaks development, which directly abuts these 2 parcels, both of them. I wanted to start with a question for you. I want to understand what a mitigated negative declaration means.
Can staff answer that question? A short definition of what that means and what the significance is?
Yes, a mitigated negative declaration is a document that local governments often prepare for development projects where a project could affect or potentially affect the environment. In this case, staff prepared a mitigated negative declaration, which means that the document that staff prepared includes mitigation measures that, in staff's opinion, would mitigate potential significant impacts related to various environmental issues or concerns to a less than significant level. So this document is prepared in compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act, and all projects that are subject to development within the state potentially must have an environmental document or an exemption to that review when a decision-making body such as yourself or a city council evaluates a project. That's in a nutshell what a mitigated negative declaration is. It is a California state statute requirement.
Thank you. Are there any instances or circumstances unique to this project that would maybe require a little bit more delineation on that, or is that just a broad-based explanation, and that's. Are there any unusual circumstances in this project that would maybe want to be spelled out a little bit more about that mitigation, or not? Yes or no, I guess.
Well, from staff's perspective, we have prepared the mitigation for you. It would be the role of this body to make recommendations to City Council if you as a group decide that those mitigations need to be modified or additional study or evaluation needs to take place before we move forward. Does that help you?
Sort of answers the question.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, it does. Thank you.
Thank you. What that tells me, in my understanding, is that it's already been recognized that there are going to be some negative environmental impacts from the development of this site in this manner, or for the rezoning of the site, and that you're trying to get ahead of it by already preparing some mitigation. And I believe in the staff report that we already heard, it sounds like the mitigation will modify some of the factors to some extent. It's not going to completely eradicate all of the factors, the negative factors that are impacted by this or brought up by this kind of a rezoning. So I think that is possibly at the core of the community response. At least what I would like to bring before you is that I'm hoping that you've read the letters from the residents that have been submitted, even though I realize you did get a new one tonight. We are recognizing potential problems in a lot of areas. So I'm hoping that you won't take this lightly and move on to the next item on the agenda, because I think that there's some really serious concerns here. First of all, we have school children that are walking to and from school in the area directly on these streets that are now proposed for high-density traffic, high-density residents. The density of the land itself, even if you take your own look at the map of the site, you can see that there's businesses, the DMV, residences, roadways that are not going to be moved or changed. So this parcel is already surrounded by a lot of things that are already going on. It's already a really dense area, and they're small parcel. The 7.6 acres is not a large area, that it's already surrounded by businesses and residences. So I'm hoping that you'll take into consideration that the density of adding this type of high-density residential housing to that area is going to be a really crowded area there. There's no room for a green belt, or there would not be room for a green belt between the roadways, this parcel that's being proposed for rezoning, and the residences at the Middletown Oaks development. So greenbelt issue, there's wildlife issues, there's light and visual blockage. One of the homeowners here, a couple of the homeowners here, they're going to have these high-density residences right in their backyard. They've got a backyard, a fence, and then the development. And I would like to ask the cheeky question, can we possibly have a computer-generated full-color picture of what that might look like as you're proposing that kind of a development? In response to, I can't read the name from here, the gentleman on the end mentioned. I'm sorry, it's my eyesight. It's my eyesight, not your fault. We've got wildlife in the area, a lot of wildlife. In fact, what really needs to happen in this area is we need some speed bumps on Middletown Road and some deer crossings or wildlife crossing signs, because there have been children that have been hit by cars, and there's a lot of wildlife in the area. There's privacy. Buildings that are more than 1 story high will be looking directly down into the houses that abut that property. There's safety issues, but I think overall one of the biggest issues that I'm hoping you will take into consideration is that Middletown Road, right there in that area, is a high traffic corridor. It's already a commuter corridor from people that are coming in during rush hour traffic. They're coming in from Cold Springs Road and even Green Valley Road, taking that Middletown Road as a back way to Highway 49 and all of the residences that are in that area. So we've already been experiencing problems getting off of our street, problem with people just going way too fast for the residences and the wildlife and the children that are in the area, the children that are walking home from the high school. Traffic in that area is already a problem. So I hope that in the mitigation, there would be a whole lot of emphasis on how not just the density of putting that many more dwellings in an enclosed space, but also the traffic issues.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead and approach the podium.
My name's Judy Madison, and I live on Panning Way. I would like to thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of some of the residents of the Middletown Oaks subdivision. We are concerned about the proposal to rezone 7 acres from commercial to commercial/housing. It borders Placerville Drive, Cold Springs Road, and Middletown Road, and Middletown Oaks. I'm sure you're all aware of the traffic congestion on these roads. Adding up to 182 additional units will certainly make things much worse. I don't know the average number of people to a unit, so I can only guess that we're talking several hundred people in a 7-acre area. Middletown Road is a connector route between Highway 49 and Placerville Drive, and it is an extremely used road to the high school and Markham Middle School. It's narrow, it has no room for pedestrians or bicycles. It's already hazardous for residents on feeder streets to turn onto Middletown Road due to speeding drivers. I see no way that it could be widened to accommodate additional traffic. It's basically a country road. Cold Springs Road is also heavily used, and we all know Placerville Drive is a main traffic artery that is in dire need of major repairs. Would it not be counter to Measure E to rezone these parcels for high-density housing when it is obvious that it would negatively impact traffic conditions in this area? Infrastructure. Until we actually have new water and sewer lines, I'm not sure that you should allow any more building of any kind. Right now, problems on Placerville Drive with the water and sewer lines happen on a regular basis. I realize Placerville just passed an increase on their tax rate to help the infrastructure, but that may take a long time. And I understand that the entire city is in need of sewer and water lines. Most of us live in Placerville because we want the quiet, peaceful life. Adding up to 182 units will certainly take away our rural atmosphere. I understand that the state mandates that we have a certain amount of property zoned to allow high-density, affordable housing if a developer steps up and wants to take such a project on. However, it would be irresponsible to go ahead with this rezoning just to satisfy the state, when it obviously would, if developed, have a very negative impact on several existing neighborhoods and violates the spirit of Measure E, which was passed by the voters of Placerville. I hope you will consider these points as well as our letters when you make your recommendation to the City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another speaker?
Commissioners, as a neighbor of the property located at the corner of Middletown Road and Cold Springs, I would like to inform you why I'm against the proposed zoning change. If you look to the east and the north of this parcel, you'll find single-family homes. Most of my neighbors and myself live where we do because we choose to live in a quiet foothill community of like-minded people. We do not choose to live in an area with multi-unit, multi-story apartments, townhouses that are the norm. I would venture to say that the majority of us would not have purchased or built our homes located if we knew that this large-scale apartment complex was going to be built down the street. Let's look at what the proposed development could mean to our neighborhood. And yes, it's our neighborhood. Of the 7+ acres, there's about 6 acres after walking it that would be buildable. At 24 units per acre, for the 6 acres, I come up with 144 apartment type units. Tonight we were told 182. At just 1,000 square feet each, that gives us 144,000 square feet of building. That covers almost 3 acres, an acre being just over 43,000 square feet. Thus, to make this project work for a developer, you would have to go multi-story units. Each unit needs parking for cars. If you go with 2 cars, you've added another 51,840 without driveways and roads. This does not, this would leave very little land for open space. Because of its location, the one possible entrance really is on Middletown Road. If you look at the location that was pointed out in your packet, it talks about an entrance coming off of Cold Springs, right in the middle across from Dawson's Carpet. Stand out there sometime and watch people come around from the right turn lane on Placerville Drive or from the left coming in the other direction, and it's almost impossible to get out on Cold Springs at that point now from the other side. To the east is a curve in Middletown Road, which you would have the potential for accidents. And in one of your letters, one of the neighbors talks about the number of accidents over the years that have happened on Middletown Road. Even by changing, this type of development would change the character of our neighborhood and have a negative impact on the value of our properties. In this neighborhood, we have the DMV, which was built for a population in the 1970s. The population of the city and the county has increased dramatically. Thus, most days, the intersection of Cold Springs and Middletown is jammed. This proposal, which would add to the mess a large number of cars, school buses, and other traffic, that does not speak to the parking problem that it would create off-site. I would like to go through some items found on the draft initial study environmental checklist mitigation monitoring program. If you would look at page 8, environmental factors potential effect, this report states that the proposed project would have no effect on land use, planning, population, or housing. Those boxes were not checked, which means that the person that put this together, or the persons that put this together, did not feel that it would have an impact at all. Adding 180 dwellings, 250 cars, 300 people will have an effect on the community. If you don't think so, then please welcome this project to your neighborhood. Page 9, analysis B. Yes, people would not be able to see from this from Highway 50, but I can assure you the neighbors on the east and the north will not only be able to see this project, but they will be able to hear what goes on in this project. Page 12, air quality. I find it hard to believe that anyone could be convinced that adding 188 cars in this location to our streets with less than significant impact on the community's air quality. Page 29 and 30, hydrology and water quality, adding 6 acres of buildings, roads, driveways with less than significant impact on the community. Once again, would you like it in your neighborhood? Page 33A, land use and planning. From this report, you're asked to believe that this project will not physically divide an established community. The report says that it would have no impact. Increased traffic alone will change our community. Page 35, C and D, noise. You can't tell me that going from a wooded lot to a place where 250 cars and 300 people live come and go and have less than significant impact on the community. Page 38, public service. This report says that there will be no impact on the police department when 300 people move into the neighborhood. My question, and I see by the report, the oral report we given tonight, we did not have a response from the police. I'm not sure that they would agree that this housing development would not impact our community. Page 41, transportation. Will doubling the traffic on Middletown Road, Cold Springs Road, have less than significant impact on the community? The report says, in effect, it will not. I differ with that. Even with widening Middletown Road in front of the proposed project, will not mitigate the curves to the east on Middletown Road. And if you've ever come down that road and had a deer cut across in front of you, there's not a whole lot of time to brake. And we're going to put families in that area. Our neighborhood is already impacted by the overflow traffic from the DMV, as I stated, with less than enough parking causes the patrons to park on the street, blocking our driveways, leaving trash, etc. Where will the visitors to this complex, with no parking on the 3 streets surrounding it, where will they park? Page 42, the report at this point wants us to believe that no new internal roads and doubling the traffic on Middletown and Cold Springs will have no impact on the community. I think this is a dream. 43, widening of Middletown Road may work for the proposed development, but the property owners on Panning Way might object to having a bike path, a sidewalk, and sidewalk right next to their house. Curbs and gutters do not fit into our neighborhood. We are not Roseville, Rockland, or El Dorado Hills. Page 44, Trans 6. Show me where in our neighborhood that street lights every 50 feet. There aren't. This type of development does not fit our neighborhood. Page 50, this report addresses birds, frogs, fish, trees, water, and about every other thing that you could think of. The one thing that it affects the most, and doesn't really address, except for under number C, is the existing residents. C says, does the project have environmental impacts which would cause substantial adverse effect on human beings, either directly or indirectly? I submit it does. Will the city or the developer reimburse the surrounding homeowners for the drop in property values? I think not. Will the city or the developer reimburse the surrounding homeowners for the drop in the quality of life that exists in our neighborhood? Mitigation. In this draft environmental report, the word mitigation is used a number of times.
John, can I interrupt for just a minute?
Sure.
I appreciate you delineating your objections, especially with reference to the report. I don't know how many other members of the public would like to speak tonight. If there are none, or
I have about 2 statements left.
okay.
Mitigation. In the draft environmental study, the word mitigation is used a number of times. For the large trees, I've already gone, and I'll skip that portion. Ask yourselves, if this project was going to be proposed in your backyard, would you welcome it? It is my hope that the above information will help you to see that this parcel is not suited for this type of development and will reject this proposed zoning change. This zoning density does not fit our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak to this issue tonight? Nope. Then we will close this period of public comment. And open this up for discussion among the board. Comments?
I have several comments and questions for staff. Although I want to reiterate that I really, really, really like the comment that we are not Roseville, Rockland, or El Dorado Hills. Kudos to you, Commissioner, for that statement. So to staff, I'd like to ask, can you give us some ideas of what projects could go there right now with the zoning as it is? Give us some ideas.
Well, I mentioned this earlier. The uses that are permitted in that zone are retail, hotel, motel, used merchandise, pawn shops, with conditional uses. It's possible there are some additional uses that could be built there. I know one of the properties has been for sale since I've been employed with the city, off and on for the last 15, almost 16 years. It's the easterly of the 2 parcels. So those are the types of permitted uses that could be built there. I think you could imagine what they may look like. They would probably back up to the properties along Panning Way. So you would probably see the people who reside up there would probably look into the back part of that building or buildings. Those buildings would likely face the westerly direction towards Cold Springs Road and Placerville Drive, but at an elevated position, unless the properties were graded down to the same elevation of those 2 roads I just mentioned. But
Thank you.
yeah.
And really one of the reasons for asking that question is that it's not zoned to open space, those parcels. And certainly the preference for no changes is completely understandable, and I get that. Now, there is no specific project, but because of the way this is structured, if I understood the staff report correctly, because it results in a change in amendment to the plan and zoning and text, it has to be treated as a project and therefore has to have a mitigated negative declaration prepared for it. Is that right? which I think, frankly, creates a little bit of confusion, and certainly for me, and I can imagine for the audience. I'm going to come back to that in a second. And I just want to make sure I've got clarity for my sake and for the audience if it's of value. The proposed action permits the potential for projects that are not presently permitted and also assists the city in meeting the state requirement on the housing element. Is that fair to say? That's what the proposed action would do?
That is correct. Vice Chair, if I may, I just want to go back to Commissioner Friend's earlier question about the uses that were permitted on the site, because there's one, as Andrew pointed out, the site is currently general planned for commercial uses and it's zoned for commercial uses by right. Hotel, motel, hospitals, clubs, banks, office buildings, those kinds of things. But I also want to point out that our code does allow for mixed-use development. So there is the ability to do there's currently the ability to do multi-family dwelling units, but it would have to be either above or below the ground floor. But you can do a mixed-use development, a commercial mixed-use development that would include residential uses as well. So I just want to, differentiate what we're trying to do here is to meet our RENA numbers by allowing the property owner the additional ability to develop the property not just as under the commercial development that could occur under the existing zoning, but to be able to do a affordable housing project. But to answer your question, yes, because the city is proposing a general plan amendment to allow for a standalone residential project, multifamily, and for a rezone that is a project under the California Environmental Quality Act. Therefore, we do an environmental analysis, which is in your packet. We did the initial study, and then it is staff's proposed that we do a mitigated negative declaration, meaning that the potential for significant impacts have been mitigated to a level of less than significant, as described in the initial study.
Right. Thank you for that. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But I think kind of at the crux of these questions I have and the comments are that what's allowed there right now by right certainly could generate all of the concerns that the neighbors understandably are bringing to our attention, that this action is not creating new negative impacts that otherwise could not be there. Now I see disagreement, but allow me just to move through this. I want to ask staff, what is the standard for a mitigated negative declaration? Is it no impact or less than significant? I mean, I think I kind of got the impression that folks think that the only good declaration is when there's no impact whatsoever, and if you can't completely mitigate it to no impact, then it's kind of a failure. But that's not really the standard, is it? I mean, I'm asking the court. That's not the standard, right? I mean, things don't have to be mitigated to no impact.
Correct. Some mitigation may be eliminated by a project design. For instance, if a housing development, if we actually had a physical development proposal in front of you, then when it comes to you, we would hope that you have received a project that staff would have had a chance to work with an applicant to maybe self-mitigate their project accordingly, to mitigate some related issue to the site. In this case, we don't know if a development project will be built. We don't have a physical development in which you are evaluating tonight. I can't tell you the approximate number of floors that this building will have. We do know what the parking requirements will be. We do know what the code provides. But in this case, this project is more of a, not conceptual, but it's a program. It's a potential project, and staff's mitigation will enable the developer to have a full understanding what our requirements are going to be going forward to meet our requirements and policies and goals within our various documents. It is almost without exception that the similar, or if not the same mitigation, would be imposed upon a commercial strip center if that was proposed there. There would still be street improvements to be installed. There would still be mitigation related to drainage, grading, and things of that nature. So with that being said, hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Andrew. And that kind of leads me into my last and I think my final question. A lot of the concerns raised this evening, and again, understandably so, seem to presume traffic flows, in particular on Middletown, and impacts on Panning and others. But there's nothing in here that specifies what the traffic flows are going to be, because, as you said, there's no specific project yet for us to evaluate. So, I'll ask this question. Walk us through the review and approval process that would occur should a multifamily high-density project be proposed under the HO overlay, assuming it was to be approved tonight.
And assuming the mitigation measures were incorporated within?
Well, I guess that's part of my question. So if we were to approve this as it is, would there not, and then a specific project came in, would they not have to then prepare an M&D specific for that project?
No, they would not, unless they went beyond the density in which we were proposing or showed tonight. If they came in with a change of project, meaning a project that was maybe they wanted to do a density bonus instead of the HO overlay, and they wanted to do something of that nature and go with a completely different type of project, then maybe this M&D, a draft M&D, IS M&D would not be enough of an evaluation to review that specific project. So really the intent here is to create and develop mitigation measures that we believe include those relevant sections of city code, the general plan, various plans that are related to this, such as the non-motorized transportation plan, the pedestrian circulation plan, which would require these mitigation measures as they are applicable, to ensure that a future project, if it were to occur, then the city would have mechanisms in place that would require them to go through those circumstances and meet those, minimize those impacts to a less than significant level. To answer your question on the procedure, I don't know which I can't remember which mitigation number it is, but there is a mitigation, I think it might be the first one, related to the various studies and plans that would be submitted by an applicant related to a future housing development project on the site, such as there would be a drainage plan submitted to the city where we would get to know where their drainage and how they're going to mitigate for that specific development project. There would be an evaluation of their traffic and how that traffic will be circulated and how it would impact the immediate streets. There could be additional mitigation that might be imposed based on the ultimate design of that housing development project. Those are two examples. There are additional things related to grading. We have grading ordinance in the city, and so there would be submittal of specific requirements related to that particular activity as part of the housing development project. But it would be treated as a over-the-counter ministerial permit. They would not have to come back before the Planning Commission or City Council. So this would be a project developed by right, and once again, these mitigations would serve as conditions of approval.
Well, then I have to ask this question because I'm a little bit confused then. And again, I think it's because of the way this works. We don't have a specific project, so I don't know where the egress and ingress of this project is going to be. To me, it seems to be a very different project if all the traffic goes in and out onto Middletown Road versus some comes out onto Placerville Drive and some goes out onto Cold Springs Road. Those are two very, very different approaches. So where is the review, the project-specific review then at that point? Because I don't see how this MND would deal with that. And obviously, traffic is certainly a major concern, as is the character of the neighborhood and so on and so forth. And I think those are legitimate concerns. I need to understand how we get to mitigate it or make sure that those impacts are in fact appropriately mitigated. So,
Well, in terms of the circulation,
let's use that as an example.
as an example,
I think it's a good.
Yeah, since staff does not have the physical construction drawings, it's more than a hypothetical. It's a potential project that
Right.
could be developed at 24 dwelling units per acre. Staff made some assumptions in our evaluation about access and circulation. The assumptions made that I think were enumerated by one of the speakers tonight, that talks about a ingress egress on Middletown Road as well as one off of Cold Springs Road. Due to the site constraints on the easterly portion of the site, it would be very difficult for someone to improve access to the eastern parcel. So staff envisioned that both of these project locations would be developed together. And so there was assumption made that the logical spot for a ingress egress to City Street would be those two that I mentioned that are mentioned in the staff report. But that could change by an applicant. They could come to the city with a project that involved a completely different circulation idea, and there could be a situation where that location, getting back to your first question, could trigger additional environmental review if staff believes that encroachment or that design may be more than this document would handle. So there may be an opportunity, and staff would need to evaluate that subsequent project to evaluate that particular situation.
And that's kind of where I'm going with this, I think. What assurances are there, or what's the process for assuring that any proposed project is in compliance, is congruent, comports, to use Commissioner Ogden's famous word, comports with the MND? Is that strictly at the staff level? I guess that I'm comfortable with pretty much everything except up to that point, because it seems like we have a very, very generic level of approval. We have to make sure that we believe that this will be mitigated. It's not going to be significant, so on and so forth. But it seems to me we really wouldn't know until such time as there is an actual specific project, and I'm comfortable with that if I know that there's a specific review process that can check that to make sure that there's the opportunity for the public and the community and the commission to weigh in on that. I guess that's all I have. That's kind of where I'm at.
Staff believes there is, and I would direct the commissioners then to page 41 of the initial study under the transportation traffic section of the report. And again, we did what's typically called a worst case scenario. So in other words, we just do a gross calculation of the maximum number of units multiplied by the acreage of the site to be developed. And as Mr. Pointer pointed out earlier, it's going to be much less than that. But under the California Environmental Quality Act, you always want to do an analysis for the maximum number of dwelling units that could be permitted. So we have our 182 dwelling units. We did an analysis starting at the bottom of page 41, where we looked at 6.72 vehicle trips per day per dwelling unit. So we're able to come out then with an assessment of how many additional trips will be could be imposed on Cold Springs Road, Placerville Drive, in Middletown. We did traffic counts, and we know what the current traffic counts are. So by just merely adding those on to the traffic counts, we can clearly see that there's not going to be an unacceptable level of service or an exceedance of the capacity for these existing roads. They're able to handle substantially more traffic. They're designed currently to handle more traffic than what this project would put on the roads should the project be developed. And that's the project looks at an additional of 1,199 vehicle trips per day would be added to these roads. So, for example, if Middletown Road is operating with 5,000, Cold Springs is operating at 6,000, and Placerville Drive at 13,500, the capacity of these roads currently under engineering design is 12,000 in Middletown, 14,000 on Cold Springs, and 20,000 on Placerville Drive. So there we can see that we're not causing any severe impact. The capacity currently exists for additional traffic to be put on these roads. And that's the reason why staff considered this particular site to be an infill project, because it's well served by the current circulation system. So if we move on to the mitigation measures, you can see the first mitigation measure, what's required, the applicant shall have a traffic study prepared by a licensed traffic engineering firm to study the effects of the development. This is where we'll look at exactly the angle of the intersections, any improvements to be made then to handle the movements to and from the site. But as far as the overall circulation system, staff isn't seeing any kind of significant impact because the capacity is not even being exceeded per our study. I mean, somebody would have to disagree with these numbers, but at least these are the numbers that we're working with.
Yes.
So, a couple of different thrusts here. One is what we're talking about right now is in many ways it's kind of a speculative thing, and that is to say that as things currently stand, basically what can be built on this piece of property is a mini mart, a tattoo parlor, a vape shop, or lavanderia, laundromat, strip malls. That's probably all that would fit on this land given parking requirements and all that kind of stuff. And that project, just like any notional housing development project, would be responsible for meeting the traffic impacts. In my time here, I've seen it's very common for when new housing developments go in, or when a piece of commercial property is repurposed, the city makes demands on those developers to improve and get landscaping, paving, you name it, brought up to whatever the current standards are. Just like you'd have to, when you remodel your house, you have to comply with whatever's currently in the building code. So I think we can say that what we're about right now is simply compliance with the law, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Any development, whether it be commercial or high density residential, is going to go under the same kind of review process that every other project that comes before this board, unless it's done ministerially.
I don't know that's true. Sorry, Commissioner. I think that's an excellent question, because I kind of heard that wasn't going to be the case. So all of the projects that you just described, a commercial project, absolutely would have to come to Planning Commission for review, like they do now. My understanding is that with a project that gets proposed under this overlay, doesn't anymore, because here's the M&D, it's all done at the staff level. Now, if I'm mistaken on that, that goes back to my question of what's the review process. I didn't hear anywhere in the answer, and maybe we got off on a different tangent, that a specific project comes back to commission.
Yeah, as the commission is well versed, this is the third rezone project that's come before you, and before that, the housing opportunity overlay and land use designation came before you for your review and recommendation. The housing opportunity overlay zone does have a provision in it consistent with state law that would require the local government to, for those projects that meet the affordability aspects, that it be a ministerial project. So yes, that particular type of project would come strictly to the building department counter, where staff would evaluate as Director Rivas mentioned, the mitigation measures that would be imposed upon the HO overlay at this location. We would be evaluating their proposal to make sure it meets those requirements under the city code, the general plan, the other various studies and plans that I mentioned earlier.
So I want to make sure I understand this. It sounds, the situation, it sounds to me like, is that my question is, where, at what points, so it's ministerially, they come in, pull a permit, whatever they need, they start turning over dirt. In between those two, at the counter and dropping a blade, where is the mechanism for public input on a specific real project? Are you saying that the state, through this rulemaking, has created a situation where local residents are effectively being told to like it or lump it? Or where is the process for public input on a development?
The process and input would be now.
Yeah, if it meets the special low housing, that's an exemption.
If it makes the provisions under the housing, if I can,
Yeah.
housing opportunity overlay, then the city would have to treat that application as a ministerial permit, a building permit. But as I keep reiterating, as did Director Rivas, that the mitigation measures would be evaluating that request for a building permit, subject to all of our requirements under city code, the general plan, and other various manuals and plans that we have adopted as our standard policies and procedures. So the project moving forward tonight is an opportunity for you all to make a recommendation to the city council regarding our staff-initiated, city-initiated request to rezone this property, as well as the others that you meant that we discussed in previous meetings. To conclude, yes, this would be a ministerial project if a housing development project came before the city in the future and wanted to develop by right multifamily housing at this location if it was adopted.
So this seems to be completely at odds with the concept of having design guidelines and standards in a city.
Well, the mitigation includes comportness with those city development standards that we have.
Okay, I just my attitude on these things have always been these rezones is that we, as a planning commission and then ultimately the city council, are kind of find ourselves in this pincer situation where the state has written and promulgated new regulations, and it was like the sewer plant, like a very, very, very wise city councilman once said, why are we building this thing? Because it's the law. Okay, and we're kind of at that stage there, I think, with this process we're going through. But so what I'm hearing from you is that the MND as written and checkboxes filled and that sort of thing still gives the city to enforce things like design standards.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. And what we're being asked to do right now is I have some bad metaphors, but we're being asked to approve the construction of a atomic bomb without really understanding the math underlying fissile materials without understanding the physics. It seems like a big tall jump, which is why I've always believed that these things should be adjudicated at the city council. I think the city council provides the forum and the visibility for things like these to be hashed out. And so I don't want anybody to get the idea that if I vote for moving this in front of the city council, that I'm nuts about the idea. I mean, I think it has raises significant concerns. I don't know. Maybe there's some way maybe at the city council, we could have the Q&A session or the conversation that says, these are the protections we still maintain, because it's not abundantly clear to me. Thanks.
Vice Chair Roby, I've got an additional comment.
Yes, go ahead.
As I understand the state housing law, the goal of the state's goal regarding housing is to effectively house its residents of all income levels. And in order for them to make this happen, to implement that, they have imposed requirements on local constituencies like ourselves and the counties throughout the state. The city's intent here with the housing opportunity overlay is to provide an opportunity for the housing to be developed. There's no requirement by the city imposed by the state to have those units built. We just have to provide the mechanism, the regulations, the zoning to allow for the effective potential to be developed within our city to meet our housing needs for all of our income levels. That's really the underlying and overlying aspect. So again, the state housing law, their goal is to house all of its citizens, all of its residents, as best they can. And in order to do that, they have imposed certain things amongst their populace, the cities and counties within the jurisdiction. And this mechanism that the city has brought forward and is codified, the housing opportunity overlay. The city is suggesting that this location is suitable because of its infill, as Director Rivas mentioned earlier. It's an infill project, it's an infill location, and it's surrounded by uses and that could be complementary to those people who live there. It's walking distance to employment centers, to the library, to other resources that the residents that may reside there would use and frequent. So that kind of concludes my comment. But again, I wanted to reiterate for the third time that state housing law's goal is to house everyone. This opportunity for the city is a way to accommodate our unmet need for a particular income level. But it's not required that any development occur on this site. It could remain vacant for years. It's been vacant since I moved here. Like I said earlier, it's one of the parcels have been for sale for at least 15 years. So that kind of concludes my comment.
Thank you.
So I'll quote Director Rivas and say, but let's plan for the worst case scenario. Right, and that's what we have to do. Now, I guess the question I have, does the city have control over the mitigation measures that can be required? I mean, see, if the fundamental problem with this is, as we talked about earlier, you could have all kinds of other projects that go in that create as many of the issues that the residents are concerned about as the multifamily high density dwelling situation can create. And that's allowable right now by right. The fundamental difference is those would come before this body and be heard in a public hearing on a specific project that people could see and comment on. and we've given that up with this approach. Okay, now I'm a fan of the HO. I thought it was very creative as staff. It really helped us to meet the requirements that are being imposed on us by those down in Sacramento. But there seems to be a price, and now I'm trying to figure out, is there a way for us to mitigate the price? So for example, well, I'll give you two examples, and don't answer until I give. I'm using these as kind of hypothetical. I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but couldn't we require as a mitigation measure, for example, that there would be no ingress and egress to Middletown Road, as an example? Looking at okay, I'm not sure I agree with staff's assessment that in terms of substantially degrading the existing visual character or quality of the site, it'd be less than significant with mitigation incorporated, with the basis of that being, hey, it's just an undeveloped lot. Well, undeveloped lots are kind of like open space. We tend to place a premium on open space, and that's supposed to be a value. So I'm not sure how we can argue that on one hand, and then argue on the other hand that, well, it's just a vacant lot that happens to be covered with a lot of nice oaks and pines. There's a few ailanthus in there. Okay, we have to get rid of those. I agree with that. And just because it can't be seen from Highway 50 doesn't necessarily mean that it meets the mitigation. So my question then would be, could not we build in to the MND then more rigid requirements, more mitigation, for example, on the existing visual character, that this has to happen, or this may not happen, or this has to be done this way? If that's where our control is, then I think we should exercise it, because we only get the one shot at it. I'm just pulling at straws here, but it seems like that's our control. Otherwise, I do like Commissioner Lowry's suggestion about, I hate to use the word punting to council, but I mean, and if I voted for it, it would strictly be a punting to council, only because of this, what I consider to be a poison pill in this thing. But, I had a question. That was my question.
Is there an additional question there, or was that the question?
I was hoping to hear.
I'll take a shot at it, maybe give a more general response to your question. Again, going back to the typical process we would see, for example, if somebody were to come in with a development proposal on this site, as allowed under the commercial zoning district, then they would be subject to a site plan review. There's a lot of uses allowed by right. By right meaning you can't deny the use when it comes before your body. What you're doing is, and staff would have reviewed a formal, detailed application, provided you a staff report, and provided you with a recommendation. And so that this body would then agree or place additional conditions, but basically you would be sort of reviewing staff's recommendation up against all the various guidelines, design standards that the city currently has in place. So I do want to remind the commission that you spent, and correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, probably close to 2 years updating our design guidelines, our development guidelines. They're much more substantive than they were previously. And so again, I would direct you back to page 10 in the initial study, and that's under aesthetics, for the mitigation measure, the first one. And what staff attempts to do is basically distill all the review that we would have done to a project, say if it was a commercial application that would be brought before you, staff would have done this. Instead, we daylight everything that staff would do then with a housing opportunity project that would come in that was for affordable housing, and everything in here that we're going to subject the project to. So yes, it wouldn't come before you, rather than being done in a more open forum here in a public setting before the Planning Commission. It's going to be done then at the staff level. But staff feels that all these standards that are already in place, that we we must articulate in the initial study to make a determination that there's less than significant impact on aesthetics. But due to these reasons, we have very detailed standards that the projects have to comply with. Some of the earlier speakers said that maybe they had issue with curbs, gutters, and sidewalks because that's rural. Well, we are a city, and a city typically has higher standards for pedestrian accessibility, for conveyance of water that's produced from impervious surfaces, those kinds of things. So that's where you will see curb, gutter, and sidewalk, and that's a standard that is required for development within the city of Placerville. And so that's what you'll see here, and that's what we articulate in here in detail. So I encourage you to really pay attention to the initial study and what's articulated, everything we list, rather than me just reading it there. You can see it's a very substantive paragraph, but what we do is we highlight within the City of Placerville Development Guide the various chapters relating to landscaping, to lighting, to all the different components that a project would, if we had reviewed it and come before you with a recommendation instead, it would occur at the staff level.
But, and I appreciate that. But that notwithstanding, all the projects that come before us have been subject to these same standards. And yet we still deliberate here and make changes and make requirements, and that opportunity is not going to be there anymore. And that's the trade-off. You know, this is a very, very difficult trade-off, particularly in light of the potential impacts on a neighborhood. I mean, people who live there who could be impacted aren't going to have the opportunity to speak specifically to a project that's going up if it is the qualifying high density low income project as they would to a commercial development. And they didn't ask to have that right taken away from them. That's a public process problem, I think. And that to me, that's really kind of at the crux of this. I like the approach for helping us meet our housing guidelines, but it seems it's a very expensive price. We don't know what we're giving up, but is what I worry about. So I don't have anything else to offer.
Any other questions for staff?
Just to comment that if I gave the impression that I was finding fault with anything in the MND, that was absolutely not my intent. But my concern is, and maybe the penny should have dropped two iterations ago in this process on my part, is staff is being put in the position of writing this complete playbook of prevent defenses against what might come up when a developer shows up. And we're kind of being asked to push all our chips in before the first card hits the table. So, but you know what? That's the law. That was a process that took place down in Sacramento, and we're not going to be able to relitigate it in this room or even in city council for that matter. So, thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Well, my final comment would be, and I guess for council too, if it goes that far, is that I would just hope the city would do everything in its power and be as creative as possible to maintain as much control over the quality of the projects and the impact of the community as possible. And I'm not being critical of the MND per se, but I'm just saying maybe there are other opportunities that haven't been thought of or contemplated that would help to soften the risk. Really, it's about mitigating what is the risk? What's the risk for us? What's the risk for them? What's the risk for the quality of the area? Is a trade-off worth it? And is there anything that we can do, any creative opportunities we can take between now and then? That's my final comment.
All right, thank you. So we're going to close discussion at this time. Is there a motion to be made?
The wording of a recommendation, we have kind of a freelance in terms of what we say to council. It's not as prescriptive, is it? It's not a zoning text change that we're doing per se. We're giving them advice in this case?
You're being asked to provide your recommendation on the three items that are really before you. One is the mitigated negative declaration and mitigation monitoring plan, initial study. You're being asked to make a recommendation on the land use map amendment to add the housing opportunity overlay onto these two parcels. And also the third item would be to provide a recommendation regarding the zoning map amendment to add the housing opportunity overlay provisions.
Do I have to use the language that's specifically here?
No, that's just for a
Recommended,
guide.
that's suggested language?
So your language could include a recommendation. If you have additional items that you would like to recommend as a group, then it would be appropriate for you to convey that and make that part of the motion.
Really only because of Commissioner Lowry's, if it wasn't a suggestion or an observation about consideration by council, which it really were, this should be, I'll make a motion then on this item. See, we're not adopting anything. So I would recommend to the city council the following city-initiated proposal. Item 1, GPA 1603 is stated on page 1 of the staff report. I'm sorry, I'll do, okay. I'm going to recommend that the council consider the following city-initiated proposal. Item 1, GPA 1603, the general plan amendment, as described here on page 1 of the staff report. Number 2, ZC 1604, the zone change, as described on page 1 of the staff report. And item 3, EA 1601, the environmental assessment. I'm going to recommend that the council review, and consider any and all opportunities and strategies available to the city in development and adoption and filing of the mitigated negative declaration that would minimize any contemplated or potential negative impacts to the community through the adoption of items 1 and 2 preceding. That's my recommendation. That's my motion. Don't ask me to repeat it. I went as slow as I could.
I'll second that.
Let's take a vote.
Member Friend?
Do a roll call vote, please.
Aye.
Member Lowry?
Aye.
Vice Chair Roby?
Aye.
We're recommending that the council, I'm sorry, Mr.
No,
Chairman.
go ahead.
We're recommending that the council consider the rezoning, but specifically that the council look at the mitigated negative declaration and find any and all ways and strategies that can be incorporated to minimize, if not eliminate, negative impacts as a result.
Aren't you required to make a recommendation to the council?
We just did that. That we're making a recommendation for them to consider.
Okay. Thank you.
We should defer to staff.
We will probably refer you to staff for that information.
Well, understand that if it goes before city council, by definition, there will be a public hearing conducted.
Yes, to those questions. Yes, there will be a public hearing before the city council. Yes, we will notify within the 500-foot radius that we did previously. So those people who did receive notice prior to, they will receive another notice. And those people who provided us with written comments will, of course, get noticed as well if they were not within our 500-foot radius.
Thank you.
I just want to further, just for clarification, to point out to the public that the Planning Commission here is advisory only. These are what we would call legislative acts. So whenever there's an amendment to the city's general plan or a zoning change, which is by ordinance, those decisions can only be made by the city council, but they go through the Planning Commission for a recommendation. So the city council will consider the action that the Planning Commission had just taken, but it'll be actually the city council that will have to actually approve, both adopt the mitigated negative deck, to approve the general plan amendment, and to approve of the rezone.
No, I would respectfully disagree with that. The input was incredibly valuable. The input from residents, longtime residents, gives us a point of view. I've lived in Placerville for 28 years, and I still, I don't see things from everybody else's points of view. So it was very valuable. I know it was times can be an emotional issue. I think looking at this, the thing that kept popping into my head was, well, this may not be the wrong answer, but we might not have the right answer at this time. So what we're doing is hopefully shaping and guiding and providing additional input for this issue if and when these projects or potential projects do come up. So again, I'm sure that the entire board appreciates your input. It is valuable. So we will, yes.
If I may, as the maker of the motion, if I may, if I did not care about the issues that you brought before the commission, I would have made a motion that simply said receive and file. That's not the motion that was made. The council, this body specifically directed city council to review and consider any and all measures that might be added into the mitigated negative declaration to reduce or eliminate negative impacts. That's about as far, I think, as we could go. If we really didn't care, we would have just said receive and file, 1, 2, 3, rubber stamp. I don't believe that we did that this evening. And that's about as best as we could do, I think.
Yeah, as a member said, there will be a public hearing. Notice will be given. I was assumed to, again, the 500-foot radius, which would include, I'm assuming, some of the attendance tonight. There will be a public notice given, so you will have the same opportunity for input at that time that you would tonight, if, again, that comes before the city council. So
Also, staff will add that the written comments that we've received thus far will move forward to City Council, so they'll be able to read all of those prior to their deliberation consideration of this item.
Andrew, just for everyone's benefit, it must go to a public hearing, correct?
Yes.
I think there's some concern that council can simply just do it. There will be, it must have a public hearing,
Yes,
and they will vote on it.
as Director Rivas mentioned earlier, it's a legislative act, so yes, a public hearing would be required for the general plan amendment, map amendment, and the zoning map amendment.
All right, thank you. We're going to proceed to item 6, matters from planning commissioners.
Andrew, can you tell us anything about parklets?
I think Director Rivas might be able to shed some light on that, perhaps.
In general, parklets are it's a new concept whereby parking stalls are utilized on a temporary basis as a park or as a seating extension of an adjoining cafe or restaurant. You see them now in San Francisco, Seattle. A lot of the major cities use parklets. El Dorado County Health Department is actually received a grant to have a parklet constructed on Main Street in the city of Placerville as a demonstration project, and that's slowly proceeding forward. It's in the design phase. I believe they're trying to garner interest from the different high schools to submit design, and then the winning design will then move forward to construction. The city will be, at least is looking at allowing a parklet to be installed on Main Street to occupy one parking stall for maybe a 4-month, 5-month basis. But essentially that's what a parklet is. I encourage any of you that are interested in what parklets are, just Google it and you will see all kinds of designs and different aspects of parklets that are being utilized in cities across the United States.
Is there no public review? It's
There will be a
just going to
public
automatically happen?
No, it doesn't automatically happen. We actually have been making presentations to various groups. We will be proposing to allow the parklet to occur under a temporary use permit, but we will run the parklet application through the Planning Commission and then the City Council.
So if it's going to go out in front of a certain business or cafe, how are you mitigating the benefit to that particular business and that other businesses aren't going to enjoy?
We're not looking at that as an impact, and so thus we're not
Where do I
mitigating
sign up?
The impact is loss of one automobile parking stall.
But when we make decisions, and particularly when exceptions come to it, we're supposed to grant waivers and exceptions. We're supposed to make sure that the applicant is not receiving an advantage over other people in the neighborhood or whatever area we're looking at. And it sounds like this would automatically create an advantage to a particular business.
The applicant is El Dorado County Public Health, and they received a grant. And again, the whole idea is to get people out of their cars, get people to encourage more healthful lifestyles and the like. And so presentations have been given to the Downtown Business Association, the PDA, to the PEAC, the Placerville Economic Advisory Committee. And again, there will be presentations, or there will be an application brought forward to this body and then ultimately to the City Council.
Do you have a time frame?
I believe that a selection will be made later this month, and hopefully we'll move into construction sometime later in the winter season. Hopefully we'll have a parklet.
No, wait. Before construction, wouldn't it come to Planning Commission before construction or not?
Yes, they have to come in and apply for a temporary use permit. We haven't gotten that application yet.
Okay.
But hopefully we will, and we'll bring it before you.
Okay,
But
thanks.
we hope to have the park lit in for this summer.
Okay.
And again, it's a demonstration project. It's just temporary.
Well, regardless of wherever you cite it, there's going to be much gnashing of teeth and wringing of hands on the parts of those whose business it is not directly in front of.
Can't see anything but.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to watch.
So the city could offer a lottery. There's a revenue generator, offer a lottery, and you win the lottery. Buy tickets, you win the lottery, you get the parklet.
Might affect our eligibility for the grant money.
Any other matters from Commissioner? Matters from staff?
Yeah, staff has a few. Want to alert the commission about some upcoming items that City Council will consider on the 10th. The zoning amendment for the HO overlay for the Ray Lawyer Drive location, which came before you in, I believe it was November. On January 24th, the commission is to consider, we anticipate getting tonight's recommendation for item 5.2 on that 24th of January council agenda. On February 14th, due to a continuation at the previous council meeting, that the 618 Main Street, the parking lot project, the Wilbur Howe, that will land on February 14th, so Valentine's Day. I want to also invite you to pick up in a recent copy of the American Planning Association magazine that the city subscribes to. There are 2 articles that are written for, and in fact, both authors are in one case, one is a current planning commissioner in another jurisdiction, and another is a former planning commissioner who now is a city council member at another jurisdiction, related to your role as a planner, as a planning commissioner. So please pick up one of those. Also, because we haven't had consecutive meetings since we've adopted our kind of a new process, we have the item that will be heard, the packet for you for the meeting on the 17th of January, and the item project is the hotel project on Jakeway Road. So tonight we will have the agenda for that meeting available to you, as well as the packet for that item. Of course, the minutes from tonight's meeting will not be in that packet because I have not drafted those, but I have spoken to 2 members this evening, and they have told me that they would prefer getting a copy of the draft minutes by email. If that's okay with either of the rest of you, then that would be fine. Once they are made available to you all, the city will make them available to the public, so they'll be posted on the city's website, as well as made available at the counter. So if the public wants to review those draft minutes when they're prepared, I hope to get them done by the end of the week. I think that's it.
I had one quick question on the outdoor non-smoking guidelines or cafe, non-smoking cafe dining. Is there something coming before us on that project? That item?
Outdoor seating, outdoor dining? That came before
Outdoor
you?
dining and non-smoke. No, I thought there was a non-smoking ordinance thingy that's coming.
The outdoor dining ordinance did go through this body several times, workshop and then the draft ordinance. I think at 2 separate meetings. That is moving forward onto the city council. My recollection, if memory serves, is this body added some language that outdoor dining would not permit smoking.
No other matters from staff?
No.
All right, then we will adjourn. Thank you very much.